great observation. Well, let's just jump right into this and talk about, and I think Naomi started us down this road around what are some of the new or continuing rights issues that really will be important to the LGBT community over the next several years. And who would like to start? Tyrone, why don't you start?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you. I mean, obviously my work is going to reflect kind of like what I think are important issues, but I think particularly around the criminal justice system, I think the stats that you showed, and there are more data out there that really shows that how LGBT people are disproportionately pushed into the criminal justice system, particularly those who are identified of color. I think that's really important to talk about. And I think that as this conversation is moving forward around looking at mass incarceration, I think that we're finally as a country having a conversation about the impact of mass incarceration. But I think one thing that is really important for the LGBT movement is to really talk about how we as a community, particularly those of color, are being pushed into this system by, for example, the profiling of trans women of color as sex workers, to the pushing of LGBT youth into the juvenile justice system, but then looking not only at that, how people are being pushed into the system, but how we are particularly being treated, abused, and experiencing violence in institutions like prisons, juvenile justice facilities, particularly when you look at issues of solitary confinement. A lot of LGBT people, Black and Pink, which is an organization that supports LGBT inmates and formerly incarcerated folks, show that at a high number, a majority of the survey respondents said they had experienced solitary confinement. And so this is very much an LGBT issue, but I think it's hard because I think a lot of people see the LGBT issues as very singular. And I think we're getting to the point in our movement where we are saying like these aren't singular issues, and we really need to talk about how particular people are marginalized within our community, because I think until we do that, I think we're not really going to reach the most vulnerable people. We can pass non-discrimination laws, but then when you have trans women of color being locked up for sex work and then they experience violence, the non-discrimination law is not necessarily going to protect them in those situations, although it would help, because one reason why that trans women find, particularly trans women of color, turn to sex work is because they're being discriminated. They can't have any other legal. What else are you going to do? You need to survive. And so it's really infuriating to think that we live in a society that does not think these homophobic, transphobic laws are not going to have material impacts on people. And so on one hand, you're saying you shouldn't be a sex worker, but on the other hand, you're saying you don't have a right to a job. Like, to me, that there's something really absurd there, and that and as human beings, of course, we're going to do whatever we need to do in order to survive. And so I think that one of the major issues, both Naomi and I are involved in, is a criminal justice working group, and that's where we focus simply on the criminal justice system, how it impacts LGBTQ people and people living with HIV and AIDS. And so I think that's definitely very much an emergent issue, and I'm really excited because I think there's some traction happening there. I think people are realizing that LGBT piece in the conversation around mass incarceration.
And I would add to that because with some of the criminal justice reform, we're seeing that on both sides of the aisle. I mean, their motivations are very different, but if we can hit the results. And for people with HIV, because I think our organizations both go beyond the LGBT community in that, we're finding things like access. So, can you get PrEP? And if your insurance company covers it, but if you're a person of color, it's much harder to get. There's these false obstacles put in the way, and so we see that play out in other ways as well. Mainly, for my work, has been around, which is sort of two sides of the same coin of trying to win LGBT anti-discrimination protections, and then just the ferocious backlash we faced after the marriage win. And we really saw it first in Indiana with with Governor Pence, who's just the nominee.
Yes.
And he is a true believer. I mean, there's some politicians that use our issues for cheap political points. I mean, he really does not like the LGBT community. He really, it's personal to him. And what we've seen in these laws is just an incredible attack on all of our rights, but almost immediately zeroed in onto the trans community. And the the most vulnerable. I mean, in a true bully fashion, you find the most vulnerable person you can to go after. And so it's kids. It's kids that are not able to go to the bathroom, that are having to hold their bathroom in school, or afraid to participate in sports. And so they're automatically sort of pulled out of their ability to advance and move forward. And it's really been frightening, but what's been sort of, that gives me heart is first in Indiana and then in the country to watch the corporations stand with us and really put the money where their values are, or where they claimed their values were, to pull business out of North Carolina, to not move forward on a giant project in Indiana, and because that's where it hits a lot of these legislators. And thanks to the Obama administration and precedents that many of our groups have won, to be able to use Title VII and Title IX to start expanding where we're able to go and what we're able to do, and as though that starts working through the courts as well as through the departments through the Obama administration, we're seeing meaningful progress.
Okay. And Dale, what would you like to do?
Well, I would say at the federal level, we're looking at trying to pass some form of equality legislation that will protect people from discrimination in employment and housing and public accommodations and in a variety of other areas. That itself is an uphill battle. And then we've got the fact that 28 states, as was mentioned earlier, still don't have any kind of protection for LGBT people. That's going to be a battle given what we know the political map is at this point. And it's especially a battle on transgender rights, as Jim was saying. If you look at the Williams Institute, and they've got an excellent website with all kinds of information about discrimination in public policy, and you analyze and compare the statistics for discrimination, experiences of discrimination in every area, in employment and housing, in every area, however bad it is for gay, lesbian, and bisexual people, it is many times worse for transgender people.
All right. Naomi, did you want to add?
Well, I think one interesting thing about what Dale is saying is that as much as these emerging protections are happening with Title VII and Title IX, we don't have public accommodations protections based on sex. So we will never get that federally unless we pass federal legislation. And I think that that's an interesting sort of strategy that we in the movement are talking about, is we need this comprehensive bill, even if employment is covered through EEOC interpretations and expanding court definition and so forth, that sex is not covered by public accommodations law nationally. And so I think that's really important. And I'll say that, from MAP's perspective, I lead our policy work, but we do a lot of messaging work. And we actually are releasing an ad on Thursday night during the Republican National Convention on Fox News that is directly about this bathroom issue and how can we, because this is really what folks have latched onto. But I fundamentally don't believe that that is really what the issue is. The issue is that they want to be able to fire someone for being gay, that they want to be able to looking gay, or kick someone out of the apartment next to them because someone is living with a partner or because they think they're trans. And I think that they've realized that there's a lot of fear around bathrooms. And so they've seized onto this, and they've seized onto the most vulnerable people in our community. And so we are really working on how can we build up support in that area, because everyone needs to use the restroom. Everyone needs to feel safe. And when you look at the statistics about trans people in bathrooms, as Jim mentioned, they're violently abused for using a restroom. And that is obscene in this country.
I would say that the legislation, the comprehensive legislation that Naomi's talking about, is the Equality Act. And I think many of our groups have been part of authoring that. And it also protects women. I mean, it's a really robust, many of us had criticisms of ENDA or the approach to ENDA, and this is an incredibly robust legislation. I don't see any possibility of it passing with this Congress, but certainly, we'll see after November in the Senate, and maybe, things are always moving in some ways in a different or more rapid way than we thought, but to at least have something to be able to frame what we're fighting for and to talk about is helpful.